The fourth of the four immeasurables is equanimity. In Sanskrit, upeksha, in Pali, upekka. And equanimity is an impartial, unbiased attitude towards others. Now we tend to be very partial or biased. And we tend to categorize people into three groups simply from the perspective of how they seem to affect us. Those people around us who seem to support me in my happiness, we tend to label friend. Those people around us who don't seem to affect us in any way, we tend to label stranger. And those people around us who seem to interfere with me in my happiness and seem to even cause me suffering, label the so-called enemy. So we end up, therefore, with attachment to friends because they seem to be the source of our happiness. We end up with apathy or indifference to strangers because they don't seem to be affecting us anyway, so I don't care what happens to them. And we often end up with hostility, anger and hatred to difficult people because they seem to be the source of our suffering. So equanimity is about overcoming this. And we can begin to overcome this by appreciating that we're all stuck in the same situation. We're all wanting to be happy, we're all wanting to be free of suffering. We're all equal in this regard. And thereby sort of develop this sense of closeness. We're all stuck in the same situation, wanting to be happy, wanting to be free of suffering. And it's this equanimity which allows the other three qualities to really expand out to everyone, to all living beings. And we're going to practice an equanimity meditation in this evening session after dinner. Now, each one of these four immeasurables has what's called a near enemy. And a near enemy is something that looks like that quality, but actually it interferes with that quality, it causes problems, it corrupts the quality. And we've already seen at least one of those, and that is with loving kindness. And that is the near enemy of loving kindness is attachment. Because attachment seems like loving kindness because we are very much connected to another person. But of course, attachment is all about me and actually sees the other person as an object to satisfy me. And so therefore, as we mentioned earlier in the context of loving kindness, to really distinguish those two, to increase loving kindness and decrease attachment. How to help to decrease attachment is that the four immeasurables, one of the other four immeasurables can be very helpful there, and that is equanimity. Which means that if we see our loving kindness sort of degenerating simply into attachment, then it's good to reflect on equanimity. Because remember, equanimity is not only to overcome attachment to friends, it's apathy to strangers and aversion to difficult people. So the equanimity sort of acts as an antidote to the near enemy of loving kindness. But equanimity has its own near enemy, and that is indifference. Because we can simply become equally indifferent to everyone. Couldn't care less what happens to anyone, so I'm equal with everyone. But of course this is not equanimity. So if we see equanimity simply degenerating into being completely indifferent to everyone, then it's helpful to reflect on compassion. Because it becomes difficult to remain indifferent when we see the sufferings of others. And then compassion also has its own near enemy. In fact, here we can probably talk about two near enemies. One near enemy is pity. Pity looks like compassion, but it's sort of really elevating ourselves above others. Poor you. I'm okay, but poor you. So if we see our compassion is really just pity, then it can be helpful to reflect on equanimity. But I think the main near enemy that we often find is this despair. And again, often it's because we have this obsessive focus on the negative. So if we find our compassion is degenerating into despair, then it's helpful to focus on the positives, empathetic joy. But empathetic joy also has a near enemy. And that is that sometimes, because this is a rejoicing in our own mother's virtue, good fortune, and we can end up even just rejoicing for sort of meaningless things, or even rejoicing when we see others suffering. So if we find our rejoicing is becoming very sort of meaningless rejoicing, then it's very helpful to reflect on loving kindness, the wish or aspiration for ourselves and others to have happiness in its causes. So what we see here is that each one of the four immeasurables has this near enemy which can cause it to go astray, but one of the other four immeasurables sort of acts as an antidote, which means that if we are cultivating these four qualities as a unit, then they sort of act to help us to avoid falling to those near enemies. Any questions on that? There's one more thing I want to add, but if there's any questions first.
I have a big question. Like if we can tell us like how to do the meditation by ourselves, like give us some points what to do, instead of wait to put the each one of them.
Yeah. So the question is, for these sorts of analytical meditations where we go through a number of points, it would be helpful to have something, those points, we can go through. I mean, of course we can listen, but maybe we forget. I think we can do that. I mean, for a lot of these meditations I have that, and so maybe I can give that to someone and they can translate into sort of Hebrew just the main points. But of course, what we need to be careful of is if we have that or we're listening, not to become over-reliant on it. Because what can happen is, of course, having those points or having a guided meditation we can listen to is helpful. But then if we just keep doing that, we just keep listening to guided meditations, we tend to become a bit lazy. We're not really doing the practice, we just sort of hit the play button and we're sort of...
That's why I asked to do it like we do in the Shamatha, we know what to do.
Exactly. So, I think we can make that available, and certainly
what to do.
Exactly. And also what is very helpful for these sorts of meditations is to sort of fine-tune them a little bit according to your own character. So we can find that there's certain things are more effective or less effective, or the way of saying it. So then you can fine-tune it according to what speaks to you more. So yes, I think we can make that available. Okay. Just a couple of a practical thing in terms of how to practically bring this empathetic joy into daily life. And that is that, of course, in general, when we see others do something wonderful, to be happy, or when we do something wonderful, to be happy. But of course, what we need to be careful of is cognitive fusion. So if someone is doing something wonderful, then it's not really helpful to praise that person. Because if you praise the person, there's a chance that that person will go, oh yeah, I'm really special, I'm very good. And it can become a bit of an ego trip. Rather, praise the behaviour. So instead of saying, you're a fantastic person, better to say, you did a fantastic thing. Because it's more likely that will inspire them to continue to do that again. Whereas if you say, you're just a fantastic person, if they're doing cognitive fusion, they're probably going, oh yeah, I am really fantastic, aren't I? I'm really fantastic, I'm better than everyone. Whereas if you say, you did a fantastic thing, that would more likely lead them to being inspired to continue to do that. Even better than saying, you did a fantastic thing, leave out the you. Because even if you say, you did a fantastic thing, what they may interpret or hear is, I'm a fantastic person, if they're doing cognitive fusion a lot. So rather even than saying, you did a fantastic thing, you can even say, wow, that's such a fantastic thing to do. I mean, it's obvious they did it, but if you leave out the you, if you just say, that's such a fantastic thing to do, less likely they will do the cognitive fusion themselves. Similarly with ourselves, if we've done something fantastic, don't go, I'm a fantastic person. Again, I did a fantastic thing, or better, that's a fantastic thing to do. So praising, again, avoiding the cognitive fusion. So how can we of course, we can do that throughout the day, but I think at least what we can do is at the end of every day, before we go to bed, review our day. How did our day go? And then we can do 3 things. First, pick one negative, one not so good thing we did during the day. And again, don't do cognitive fusion and then feel guilty, but rather acknowledge, I have done this harmful thing today. And the first thing to do is then have sincere regret for that. And so there are 4 things we can do here. In Buddhism, this is called the 4 opponent powers. It's going to help us to purify those negative habits. So the first thing is to have sincere regret, having done that or said that thing. Then to reaffirm our positive direction in our life. And that's often translated as reliance in terms of who or what are we relying on for our direction in life? Of course, in the Buddhist context, in the Mahayana Buddhism, it takes on a very specific form. It takes on what's called refuge and bodhicitta. But here, I think, if we want to speak very generally, then perhaps our platform in life or our direction in life is maybe we want to help others as much as we can, or at least to be ethical. Whatever our positive direction in life is, of course, if we've done something negative, we've fallen down from that. This second step of reliance is just about picking ourselves back up and reaffirming the positive direction of our life, whatever that might be. That's reliance. The third thing we can do is think of some sort of practical remedy for that harmful behaviour. So let's say you reflected on your day and you remember that earlier that day you really said some harsh words to someone at work. Then a remedy could be simply, okay, tomorrow morning I'm going to apologise to them. So do some sort of positive opposite action. If that, for whatever reason, is not possible, then any positive behaviour with the motivation of wishing to overcome that negative habit is effective. And then the last thing to do is resolve, is to make a strong determination not to do that negative behaviour again. So if we do these four things, and again, just pick one negative thing. If we pick more, we're not going to do it because it'll be too much effort. Pick one, go through these four steps, and this is going to be very helpful, effective, to purifying our mind of this negative, imprint negative habit. But equally important, maybe even more important, because we have an excessive focus on the negative in our modern society, is pick one positive thing we did during the day. And do this empathetic joy. So first, rejoice. And then also resolve. So make a strong determination to continue that good behaviour the next day. So in that way, we'll strengthen our positive habits, we'll weaken our negative habits. And then I think one more thing we can do and that is think of one thing we received during that day and have gratitude. Because we tend to take things for granted and we don't realise how fortunate we are, how many things we receive every day from many, many different sources. So pick one thing we received and have gratitude. And this can really shift our perspective of how fortunate we are, how much opportunity we have in our life to be grateful for so many things in our life. So I think if we do these three things at the end of every day, and keep it short and simple, this is a very helpful way to finish the day. Any questions there before we take a tea break? Okay, let's leave it there. I think today now is finally Sunday, correct? And so we have a slight change of schedule. So now I think the tea break is till 4:30, and then the yoga with Sippy is downstairs from the reception of the hotel. So the reception of the hotel, there's stairs beside the reception, go down, and underneath is the yoga place down there. So take your yoga mats if you have them here. So that's 4:30 till 5:30, and then we're coming back here at 6 o'clock because I think they'll be using this hall for a service this afternoon.
4 to 6 we can already.
Okay, so 5:30 you finish the yoga, have a short break, and then slowly make your way back here at 4 to 6, and then we'll start at 6, and then the session I'll go probably till about 6:45 or so, and then we'll have dinner as normal. So that's the program.